The blade pressed against Serafina's throat was cold as winter moonlight, but not nearly as cold as the eyes of the man holding it. "Sing for me, little bird," Lord Blackwood whispered, his breath reeking of wine and cruelty. "I know you can. I've heard the servants whispering about the beautiful voice hidden behind your affliction." Serafina remained perfectly still, her green eyes wide with carefully practiced terror. She had perfected this look over the past 5 years, the helpless, mute girl who could only communicate through gestures and written words. It was a performance that had saved her from 3 unwanted marriage proposals and countless other horrors that befell young women of noble birth in 1847 England. But Lord Blackwood was different, more persistent, more dangerous. "The Duke of Ravencrest is willing to pay handsomely for a wife," he continued, the blade never wavering. "But he specifically requested someone, quiet, obedient, unable to spread gossip about his nocturnal activities." Serafina's blood turned to ice. She had heard whispers about the Duke of Ravencrest, how his previous wives had all died under mysterious circumstances, how he was never seen during daylight hours, how servants in his castle disappeared without explanation. The rumors painted him as something far worse than a cruel husband. They painted him as a monster. "Your father's debts won't pay themselves," Blackwood sneered, "and I grow tired of waiting for my money. The Duke's offer is generous enough to clear everything, with a substantial bonus for my trouble." Serafina opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, shaking her head frantically. She pressed her hands to her throat and made the small, helpless gestures that had become second nature over the years. The universal sign language of someone who had lost their voice to childhood trauma. It was all a lie, of course. Her voice was as strong and clear as it had ever been. But 5 years ago, when her mother died and left her at the mercy of her gambling-addicted father and his creditors, Serafina had made a desperate choice. She had witnessed what happened to beautiful, articulate young women in their social circle, married off to the highest bidder, their spirits broken, their dreams crushed. So she had chosen silence. "Touching performance," Blackwood said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "But I wonder, what would happen if I simply cut your throat here and now? Would you find your voice then, I wonder?" The blade pressed deeper, and Serafina felt a thin line of blood trickle down her neck. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain silent. To break character now would mean a fate worse than death, marriage to a monster who collected wives like trophies. "Lord Blackwood." The voice that cut through the night air was like velvet wrapped around steel, smooth, cultured, but carrying an undertone of absolute authority that made both Serafina and her captor freeze. "I believe the lady has made her position quite clear." Serafina's eyes darted toward the source of the voice, and her breath caught in her throat. A man stood in the doorway of the garden pavilion where Blackwood had cornered her, tall and elegant, with dark hair that seemed to absorb the moonlight and pale skin that practically glowed in the darkness. He wore an expensive black coat that fit his lean frame perfectly, and when he moved, it was with the fluid grace of a predator. But it was his eyes that truly captured her attention. They were the color of fresh blood, and they seemed to see everything, including, she realized with growing alarm, straight through her carefully constructed facade. "Your Grace," Blackwood stammered, immediately lowering the blade. "I didn't realize you were. That is, I thought you were still traveling." Clearly, the Duke of Ravencrest, for this could be no one else, stepped into the pavilion with movements that made no sound whatsoever. "I arrived this evening and was told I might find my intended bride in the gardens." His gaze fixed on Serafina, and she felt as though he could see directly into her soul. There was something otherworldly about him, something that made her instincts scream danger, even as her treacherous heart skipped a beat. "Lady Serafina," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a curse combined. "How lovely to finally meet you." Serafina curtsied deeply, keeping her eyes downcast. She gestured to her throat and shook her head, maintaining her charade, even though every fiber of her being wanted to run screaming into the night. "Yes, I was informed of your condition," the Duke said, his tone unreadable. "How tragic that such beauty should be paired with such silence." "She's perfect for your needs, Your Grace, Blackwood said eagerly, apparently forgetting that moments ago he'd been threatening to cut her throat. Quiet, obedient, well-bred. She'll cause you no trouble whatsoever. Indeed. The Duke's eyes never left Seraphina's face. Tell me, Lord Blackwood, what were you discussing with my bride-to-be that required such intimate conversation? Blackwood's face went pale. Nothing of importance, Your Grace. Merely finalizing the arrangements with a blade to her throat? The temperature in the pavilion seemed to drop 10 degrees. Seraphina looked up to see the Duke's expression had not changed, but something in his presence had shifted. The air itself felt charged with danger, like the moment before lightning strikes. That is, she was being difficult about signing the final papers, Blackwood stammered. I merely thought to encourage her cooperation. I see. The Duke took another step forward, and Blackwood actually stumbled backward. And you thought threatening my intended bride was an appropriate method of encouragement. Your Grace, I meant no disrespect. No, the Duke said softly, and somehow that quiet tone was more terrifying than any shout could have been. You meant to intimidate a defenseless young woman into compliance. How very brave of you. Seraphina watched in fascination as Lord Blackwood, a man who had terrorized her family for months, seemed to shrink before the Duke's presence. Whatever the Duke of Ravencrest was, he was clearly far more dangerous than a simple creditor with delusions of grandeur. Leave us eat, the Duke commanded. But Your Grace, the arrangements are concluded. You will receive your payment tomorrow evening. Now leave, before I decide that your treatment of Lady Seraphina requires correction. Blackwood fled without another word, leaving Seraphina alone with the man who was supposedly going to become her husband. The man who, according to rumors, was something far more dangerous than human. For a long moment they stood in silence. The Duke studied her with those unsettling red eyes, while Seraphina tried to decide whether she was safer with him than she had been with Blackwood. The jury was still out on that question. You're bleeding, he observed, producing a pristine white handkerchief from his coat. Seraphina touched her throat where Blackwood's blade had cut her, her fingers coming away stained with red. She looked up at the Duke and nodded gratefully, reaching for the handkerchief, but instead of handing it to her, he stepped closer and gently pressed the fabric to her wound himself. His touch was impossibly gentle, and his skin was cold as marble. Better, he murmured, his face now close enough that she could see the inhuman perfection of his features. No mortal man had skin that flawless, eyes that bright, or movements that fluid. Though I suspect this is not the first time Lord Blackwood has used intimidation to get his way. Seraphina nodded, then gestured helplessly, as if trying to communicate something complex without words. You needn't pretend with me, the Duke said quietly. Seraphina's blood turned to ice. She stared at him with wide eyes, shaking her head in confusion and maintaining her facade of muteness. I can hear your heartbeat, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. It's racing now, not with fear of Blackwood, but with fear of discovery, and I can smell the lie on you, sweet as it is. Panic flooded through Seraphina's system. She stepped backward, shaking her head more frantically, pressing her hands to her throat in the gesture that had protected her for 5 years. Peace, the Duke said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. I have no intention of exposing your secret. In fact, I find it intriguing. Seraphina continued to back away until she hit the pavilion's railing. The Duke made no move to follow her, simply watching with those penetrating red eyes. A young woman of noble birth, pretending to be mute to avoid unwanted marriages, he mused. Clever, desperate but clever. It tells me you have both intelligence and courage, qualities I value far more than obedience. Despite herself, Seraphina found her fear beginning to mix with curiosity. This was not how she had expected this encounter to go. I wonder, the Duke continued, what your voice actually sounds like. I imagine it must be quite beautiful. For you to go to such lengths to hide it. Seraphina remained silent, though her mind was racing. If he knew she could speak, what did he want from her? What was his game? No matter, the Duke said, apparently reading her confusion. You will speak when you're ready. I am, if nothing else, a patient man." He turned as if to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Lady Seraphina, you needn't fear me as you feared Blackwood. I have no interest in unwilling brides. Our arrangement is purely business, a marriage of convenience that will solve your father's debts and provide me with social respectability." "What do you get out of it?" The words escaped before Seraphina could stop them, her curiosity overriding her caution. The Duke turned back with a smile that revealed teeth just a little too sharp to be entirely human. "There she is," he said softly, "and what a lovely voice it is." Seraphina clapped her hands over her mouth, horrified at her slip. "To answer your question," the Duke continued, "I get a wife who is intelligent enough to maintain necessary discretion about my unusual lifestyle, someone who understands the value of secrets. And if I refuse," Seraphina asked, since her cover was already blown, "then Lord Blackwood will find other ways to collect your father's debts, ways that will likely prove far less pleasant for you and your family." It wasn't a threat, merely a statement of fact, but it was effective nonetheless. "I see," Seraphina said quietly. "I hope you do. This arrangement benefits us both, Lady Seraphina. You gain protection and financial security. I gain a wife who won't ask inconvenient questions about why I sleep during the day and conduct my business at night." "Because you're a vampire," Seraphina said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. The Duke's eyebrows rose slightly. "Direct. I appreciate that. Yes, I am what your kind would call a vampire. Does that frighten you?" Seraphina considered the question seriously. "Should it?" "That depends entirely on you," the Duke replied. "I have no interest in harming my wife, but I do require discretion, loyalty, and the ability to maintain the fiction of a normal marriage when necessary." "And in return?" "You will live in luxury, want for nothing, and be free to pursue whatever interests you may have, as long as they don't interfere with my affairs or expose my nature." It was, Seraphina realized, a better offer than most women of her station could expect from marriage. Certainly better than anything Lord Blackwood had been threatening. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course, but not too much time. Lord Blackwood expects an answer by tomorrow evening, and I suspect his patience is wearing thin." The Duke moved toward the pavilion's exit, then paused once more. "One more thing, Lady Seraphina. I would very much like to hear you sing." "I don't sing," she said quickly. The Duke's smile was knowing and slightly predatory. "Another lie, though a smaller one. I can hear music in your speaking voice, the kind of natural melody that only comes from years of training. But as I said, I am patient. Good evening." He disappeared into the shadows with inhuman silence, leaving Seraphina alone with her racing thoughts and the scent of sandalwood and winter air that seemed to linger wherever he had been. She touched her throat where Blackwood had cut her, then where the Duke had so gently tended the wound. Two very different men, both dangerous in their own ways, but only one of them had treated her with anything resembling respect. The Duke of Ravencrest was a vampire, a creature of legend and nightmare, who drank blood and lived in darkness. By all rights, she should be terrified. Instead, she found herself intrigued. The next evening, Seraphina stood in her father's study, watching him pace back and forth like a caged animal. Lord Blackwood sat in the leather chair behind the desk, looking far too comfortable in what was supposed to be her father's domain. "Well," Blackwood demanded, "have you made your decision, girl?" Seraphina looked between the two men, both of whom had made it clear that her preferences were irrelevant to their plans. Her father wouldn't even meet her eyes. Whether from shame or simple indifference, she couldn't tell. "I have," she said quietly. Both men looked startled. In 5 years, neither had heard her speak. "You can talk," her father said stupidly. "I've always been able to talk," Seraphina replied. "I simply chose not to, but this situation seems to require clarity." "Clever little thing," Blackwood said with a leer. "The Duke will appreciate having a wife who can actually respond to his requests." "I will marry the Duke," Seraphina said, ignoring Blackwood's implications. "But I have conditions." "Conditions?" Blackwood laughed. You're hardly in a position to make demands, girl, aren't I? Serafina moved to the window, looking out at the garden where she had met her intended husband the night before. The Duke specifically requested a wife who could keep his secrets. I suspect that makes me rather valuable. What conditions? Her father asked, finally showing some interest in the conversation. First, you will never gamble again. The Duke's payment will clear your current debts, but I won't have you creating new ones that might endanger his interests. Her father nodded reluctantly. Second, Serafina continued, turning to face Blackwood, you will never contact me or my family again after this transaction is complete. The Duke values privacy, and I'm sure he wouldn't appreciate his wife being harassed by former creditors. Blackwood's expression darkened, but he nodded. And third, Serafina said, her voice growing stronger, I want it understood that this is a business arrangement. I am not chattel to be bought and sold. I am entering into a contract and I expect to be treated accordingly. The Duke has already made his expectations clear, Blackwood said. You'll find him a demanding husband. I'm sure I will, Serafina replied calmly. When is the wedding? Tomorrow night, Blackwood said. The Duke prefers evening ceremonies. Of course he did. Vampires and sunlight didn't mix well according to the stories. Then I should prepare, Serafina said. Good evening, gentlemen. She left the study with her head held high, feeling oddly liberated. For 5 years she had hidden behind silence and pretended helplessness. Now she was walking into a marriage with a vampire, but she was doing it with her eyes open and her voice restored. It was, she reflected, probably the most honest thing she had done in years. The wedding took place in the Duke's private chapel at Ravencrest Castle, a Gothic monstrosity that looked like something out of a nightmare. The ceremony was small and intimate. Just Serafina, the Duke, a nervous-looking priest, and 2 witnesses whose pale skin and red eyes suggested they were not entirely human. Serafina wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame. The Duke wore black as seemed to be his preference and looked devastatingly handsome in the candlelight. The vows were traditional, though Serafina couldn't help but notice the irony in promising to love and honor a man she barely knew, especially when that man was technically dead. You may kiss the bride, the priest said, his voice shaking slightly. The Duke stepped closer, his red eyes meeting hers. May I? He asked quietly. The question surprised her. She nodded, and he leaned down to press his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle, brief, and cold as winter morning. Welcome to Ravencrest Castle, Lady Serafina, he murmured against her lips. I hope you'll find it to your liking. As they walked back down the aisle together, Serafina caught sight of herself in one of the chapel's mirrors. She looked pale but determined, her green eyes bright with something that might have been excitement or terror. Behind her, the Duke cast no reflection at all. The wedding feast was an elaborate affair, though Serafina noticed that none of the other guests actually ate anything. They raised their glasses in toasts and made polite conversation, but the food remained untouched. The Duke, she observed, drank only wine, a deep red vintage that looked suspiciously like blood in the candlelight. Are you not hungry, Your Grace? She asked during a lull in conversation. I have. Specific dietary requirements, he replied with a slight smile. I'll attend to them later. Serafina nodded, filing that information away with everything else she was learning about her new husband. He was courteous, intelligent, and surprisingly charming when he chose to be. He was also clearly not human, surrounded by others who were equally inhuman, and probably sustained himself on blood. All things considered, she had definitely made some interesting life choices. As the evening wore on, the other guests began to drift away, leaving Serafina alone with her husband in the castle's great hall. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with unspoken questions. I suppose you'll want to consummate the marriage, Serafina said finally, deciding that directness was probably the best policy. The Duke's eyebrows rose. Do you want to consummate the marriage? The question caught her off guard. What I want has never been particularly relevant to these sorts of arrangements. It's relevant to me, the Duke said, moving closer. I told you before, I have no interest in unwilling brides. That extends to all aspects of our relationship. But surely I expect nothing beyond what we agreed upon. A marriage of convenience, discretion about my nature, and the appearance of normalcy when required. He paused, studying her face. Anything else that develops between us will be entirely voluntary. Serafina felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Thank you. Don't thank me for basic decency, the Duke said with a slight smile. Though I suppose it's sadly rare in marriages of our class. What should I call you? Serafina asked. Your Grace seems rather formal for a husband. My given name is Adrian, he replied, though I haven't used it in some time. Adrian, Serafina repeated, testing the name. I like it. And I like hearing you say it, Adrian said, his voice dropping to that velvet tone that made her pulse quicken. You have a beautiful voice, Serafina. I hope you'll use it more often now. I'm still getting used to the idea that I can, she admitted. 5 years is a long time to remain silent. What made you choose that particular deception? Serafina moved to one of the tall windows that looked out over the castle grounds. My mother died when I was 17. She had been, protecting me from my father's creditors, from unwanted suitors, from all the unpleasant realities of our financial situation. When she was gone, I realized how vulnerable I was. So you made yourself appear even more vulnerable to avoid unwanted attention. Exactly. Men want wives who are beautiful and well-bred, but they also want wives who won't cause them trouble. A mute woman seemed like the perfect solution, decorative but harmless. Clever, Adrian said, moving to stand beside her at the window. And it worked, until you met someone who could see through the deception. How did you know, Serafina asked, that I was pretending? Enhanced senses, Adrian replied. I can hear your heartbeat, smell your emotions, detect the subtle changes in your breathing that indicate deception. It's useful in my line of work. Which is, I solve problems for people who can afford my services. Sometimes those problems involve supernatural threats. Sometimes they involve more mundane dangers. Always they require discretion. Serafina nodded. It made sense that a vampire would find work in the shadows, dealing with things that ordinary people couldn't or wouldn't handle. Will you tell me about it? Your work, I mean. Your real life. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Most people prefer not to know the details of what I do. I'm not most people, Serafina said. I've spent 5 years pretending to be someone I'm not. I'd rather know the truth, even if it's unpleasant. Very well, but perhaps we should start with something simpler. Adrian turned to face her fully. Would you like to see your rooms? I thought you might prefer your own space, at least initially. That's very considerate, Serafina said, surprised again by his thoughtfulness. I try to be a considerate husband, even in a marriage of convenience. He led her through the castle's winding corridors, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors and tapestries that seemed to move in the flickering candlelight. Ravencrest Castle was ancient and imposing, but it was also beautiful in its own dark way. Here, Adrian said, opening a heavy wooden door. I hope you'll find everything to your liking. Serafina stepped into the most beautiful bedroom she had ever seen. The walls were hung with rich burgundy silk. The furniture was carved from dark wood and polished to a mirror shine, and a fire crackled merrily in the ornate fireplace. French doors opened onto a balcony that overlooked the castle's gardens. It's magnificent, she breathed. I'm glad you approve. Your sitting room is through there, Adrian indicated another door, and your dressing room is beyond that. I've taken the liberty of having some clothes made for you. I hope the sizes are correct. Serafina opened the dressing room door and gasped. Dozens of gowns hung from wooden rods, ranging from simple day dresses to elaborate evening wear. There were shoes, gloves, jewelry, everything a duchess could possibly need. How did you know my measurements? She asked. I have excellent observational skills, Adrian replied with a slight smile, and I may have consulted with your former dressmaker. This must have cost a fortune. I have several fortunes, Adrian said dismissively. The advantage of living for centuries is that one's investments have time to compound. How old are you? Serafina asked, then immediately felt foolish for the question. Old enough to remember when this castle was new, Adrian replied, but not so old that I've forgotten how to appreciate beauty when I see it. The compliment made heat rise in Serafina's cheeks. "Thank you. You're welcome. Now I'll leave you to settle in. If you need anything, pull the bell cord by the fireplace. Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper, will attend to you." "Adrian," Serafina called as he reached the door. "Yes? What happens now? I mean, what's expected of me as your wife?" Adrian considered the question. "Be yourself. Explore the castle and grounds if you wish, though I'd recommend staying inside during daylight hours. The staff can be unsettling to those who aren't accustomed to supernatural beings." "Are they all vampires?" "Most of them. A few werewolves, 1 or 2 witches. I find that supernatural beings make more loyal employees. They understand the value of discretion." "And at night?" "At night I work. You're welcome to join me if you're interested, or you can pursue your own activities. The library is extensive. The music room has an excellent piano and the gardens are quite beautiful by moonlight." "You mentioned the music room," Serafina said carefully. "Do you play?" "I do. Do you?" Serafina hesitated. Music had been her passion before she'd chosen silence, but admitting that felt like revealing another secret. "I used to," she said finally. "Perhaps you'll play for me sometime," Adrian said. "I'd very much like to hear you." After he left, Serafina explored her new rooms more thoroughly. Everything was luxurious and thoughtfully appointed, from the silk sheets on the massive bed to the selection of books on the sitting room shelves. Someone had put considerable effort into making her comfortable. She found a nightgown laid out on the bed, silk and lace in a shade of deep blue that complemented her eyes. When she changed into it and looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. For 5 years, she had dressed plainly, moved quietly, made herself as unremarkable as possible. Now, in silk and lace in a room fit for a queen, she looked like someone entirely different. She looked like a duchess. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. A middle-aged woman entered, carrying a tea service. She had graying hair and kind eyes, though her skin had the same pale quality as the other castle residents. "Good evening, Your Grace," the woman said with a curtsy. "I'm Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper. His Grace thought you might like some tea before bed." "That's very thoughtful, thank you." Serafina accepted the cup gratefully. "Mrs. Whitmore, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Your Grace." "How long have you worked for the Duke?" "Nearly 50 years now," Mrs. Whitmore replied. "He's a good master, fair, generous, protective of those who serve him loyally. And you're a vampire, yes. His Grace turned me himself when I was dying of consumption, gave me a choice, death or eternal service. I chose service, and I've never regretted it." "He saved your life." "He saved my existence," Mrs. Whitmore corrected gently. "There's a difference, but yes, I owe him everything." "What kind of master is he, really?" Mrs. Whitmore smiled. "The kind who asks rather than commands, who protects rather than exploits. You'll be happy here, Your Grace, if you let yourself be." After the housekeeper left, Serafina sat by the fire, sipping her tea and thinking about everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she had been a desperate young woman, pretending to be mute to avoid an unwanted marriage. Now she was the wife of a vampire duke, living in a castle full of supernatural beings, with more luxury than she had ever imagined. It was, she reflected, quite a change of circumstances. She was just about to retire when she heard it, the sound of piano music drifting up from somewhere below. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, complex and emotional, played with the skill of someone who had been practicing for decades, or perhaps centuries. Without thinking, Serafina opened her door and followed the sound through the castle's corridors. It led her down a grand staircase and through several rooms until she found herself outside the music room Adrian had mentioned. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see him seated at a magnificent grand piano. His fingers moved across the keys with inhuman grace, coaxing music from the instrument that seemed to speak directly to her soul. The piece was melancholy and beautiful, full of longing and loss and a kind of eternal sadness that made her heart ache. It was the music of someone who had lived too long and seen too much, who carried the weight of centuries in every note. Without realizing it, Serafina began to hum along, softly at first, then with growing confidence as the melody captured her completely. Her voice blended with the piano, adding a wordless harmony that seemed to complete the piece. The music stopped abruptly. "Don't stop!" Adrian's voice came from the darkness beyond the door. "Please." Serafina realized she had been discovered, but instead of embarrassment, she felt only the desire to continue making music. She pushed the door open and stepped into the room. "I'm sorry," she said. "I heard you playing, and I couldn't help myself." "Don't apologize," Adrian said, rising from the piano bench. "That was beautiful. Your voice. It's even more lovely than I imagined." "I haven't sung in 5 years," Serafina admitted. "Why did you stop?" "Because singing draws attention, and attention was the last thing I wanted." Adrian moved closer, his red eyes intense in the candlelight. "And now?" "Now I'm married to a vampire who already knows all my secrets," Serafina said with a slight smile. "I suppose there's no point in hiding anymore." "No," Adrian agreed. "No point at all." He returned to the piano and began playing again, a different piece this time, lighter and more hopeful. Serafina found herself drawn to stand beside the instrument, and when the melody called for it, she began to sing. Her voice soared through the music room, filling the space with warmth and light. She sang without words, letting the melody carry her emotions, the fear and uncertainty of the past few days, the strange hope that was beginning to bloom in her chest, the unexpected attraction she felt for her mysterious husband. When the last note faded, they stood in silence, looking at each other across the piano. "Magnificent," Adrian said softly. "Absolutely magnificent." "The music or the voice?" Serafina asked. "Both, together." Adrian's expression was intense, almost hungry. "I've never heard anything quite like it." "You play beautifully," Serafina said. "How long have you been practicing?" 200 years, give or take," Adrian replied. "Music is one of the few pleasures that doesn't lose its appeal over time." "What are the others?" Adrian's smile was slow and predatory. "Perhaps you'll discover that for yourself." The promise in his voice made heat pool in Serafina's stomach. This was dangerous territory. She was supposed to be in a marriage of convenience, not developing genuine feelings for her vampire husband. But as she looked at him in the candlelight, his red eyes warm with appreciation and something that might have been desire, she found herself wondering if convenience was really all either of them wanted. "I should retire," she said, though she made no move to leave. "Should you?" Adrian asked, moving around the piano to stand closer to her. "Or would you prefer to stay and make music?" Serafina found herself at a loss for words, caught between propriety and the growing desire to know this man better. "There's no pressure," Adrian said gently, "but I find myself reluctant to end this evening. It's been unexpectedly pleasant." "For me as well," Serafina admitted. "Then stay. Sing with me. Let me learn the sound of your voice when you're truly free to use it." And so she stayed, and they made music together until the first hints of dawn began to touch the windows. Only then did Adrian reluctantly bring their impromptu concert to an end. "I must retire," he said, though he seemed as reluctant as she felt. "Sunlight and my kind don't mix well." "Of course," Serafina said. "Thank you for letting me sing again." "Thank you for sharing your gift," Adrian replied. "Perhaps we can do this again tomorrow night." "I'd like that," Serafina said, and realized she meant it completely. As she made her way back to her rooms, Serafina reflected on how much her life had changed in just one day. She had entered into a marriage of convenience with a vampire, expecting nothing more than mutual tolerance and financial security. Instead, she found herself genuinely intrigued by her husband, attracted to his intelligence and kindness, and thrilled by the opportunity to make music again. It was, she thought, as she settled into her luxurious bed, the beginning of something that might be far more than convenient. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that surprised Serafina with its comfort and ease. She would spend her days exploring the castle and grounds, reading in the extensive library, or working in the music room. Adrian would join her each evening and they would dine together, or rather, she would dine while he sipped his wine and entertained her with stories of his long life. After dinner, They would retire to the music room where Adrian would play and Serafina would sing. Sometimes they performed pieces she knew, classical compositions she had learned in her youth. Other times Adrian would improvise, creating melodies on the spot that seemed designed specifically for her voice. It was during these musical interludes that Serafina began to truly know her husband. His playing revealed depths of emotion that his controlled demeanor usually concealed, centuries of loneliness, moments of joy, the weight of immortality, and increasingly something that felt like growing affection. "You're troubled tonight," Serafina observed one evening, as Adrian's playing took on a particularly melancholy tone. "Am I so transparent?" Adrian asked, his fingers never pausing on the keys. "Your music is," Serafina replied, moving to stand beside the piano. "It's sadder than usual. More conflicted." Adrian's hands stilled on the keys. "I received some disturbing news today. There have been attacks in the neighboring counties, vampires feeding indiscriminately, leaving bodies in their wake. Rogue vampires? Newly turned ones, most likely. Someone is creating vampires without teaching them control, then abandoning them to their hunger." Adrian's expression darkened. "It's the kind of behavior that leads to vampire hunters and mass hysteria. Is that what you do? Hunt rogue vampires? Among other things, the supernatural community has its own form of law enforcement, and I serve as both investigator and executioner when necessary." Serafina absorbed this information. "That's why you need a wife who can keep secrets. Your work isn't exactly the sort of thing one discusses at tea parties." "Precisely." Adrian looked up at her, his red eyes serious. "Does it disturb you, knowing that I kill others of my kind?" "Does it disturb you?" Serafina countered. "Every time," Adrian admitted, "but the alternative is allowing them to slaughter innocents. I've seen what happens when vampires lose control completely. It's not a fate I would wish on anyone." "Then you're doing necessary work," Serafina said simply. "Unpleasant perhaps, but necessary." "You're remarkably accepting of all this," Adrian observed. "Most humans would be horrified." "Most humans haven't spent 5 years pretending to be something they're not," Serafina replied. "I understand the value of maintaining necessary fictions." Adrian smiled at that, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all evening. "Indeed, you do. Would you sing for me? Something cheerful, perhaps. I find myself in need of lighter thoughts." Serafina obliged, choosing a folk song her mother had taught her years ago. It was a simple melody about spring returning after a long winter, full of hope and renewal. As she sang, she watched Adrian's expression soften, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Better?" she asked when the song ended. "Much," Adrian replied. "Your voice has a remarkable effect on me, Serafina. It's soothing in a way I hadn't expected." "Music has always been my escape," Serafina said. "When my mother was dying, when my father's gambling grew worse, when Lord Blackwood was threatening us, I would sing to myself and find peace." "Is that why you stopped? Because you associated it with pain?" "Partly, but also because I was afraid of what my voice might reveal about me. Music makes people feel things, and I couldn't afford to make people feel anything where I was concerned." Adrian stood and moved closer to her, his movements as silent and graceful as always. "And now I'm married to someone who already knows my secrets," Serafina said, echoing her words from their first night together. "Someone who seems to appreciate honesty." "I do," Adrian said softly. "More than you know." They were standing very close now, close enough that Serafina could see the flecks of gold in his red eyes, could smell the sandalwood and winter air scent that seemed to cling to him. Her heart began to race, and she saw Adrian's nostrils flare slightly as he caught the change in her scent. "Serafina," he said, her name a whisper on his lips. "Yes?" "I find myself growing quite fond of you." The admission hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger. This was supposed to be a marriage of convenience, a business arrangement that benefited them both. Genuine affection complicated things considerably. "I'm growing fond of you as well," Serafina admitted. "That could be problematic," Adrian said, though he made no move to step away from her. Why? Because I'm a vampire, and you're human. Because I'm centuries older than you and infinitely more dangerous. Because you deserve better than a monster who feeds on blood and lives in darkness. Don't I get to decide what I deserve? Serafina asked, reaching up to touch his cheek. His skin was cold as marble but smooth as silk. You don't understand what you're saying. I understand perfectly, Serafina interrupted. You're a vampire. You drink blood, you're immortal, you're stronger and faster than any human. You're also kind, intelligent, protective, and you've treated me with more respect and consideration than any human man ever has. Serafina, you asked me to sing for you because my voice brings you peace. You bought me beautiful clothes and gave me my own rooms because you wanted me to be comfortable. You've shared your music with me, told me about your work, trusted me with secrets that could destroy you if they fell into the wrong hands. Adrian's eyes were intense, almost glowing in the candlelight. You don't know what I'm capable of. The things I've done, the people I've killed. I know you've spent centuries protecting innocents from supernatural threats. I know you saved Mrs. Whitmore's life when she was dying. I know you could have forced me into this marriage, but chose to give me a choice instead. Those things don't erase my nature. No, Serafina agreed. They define it. Your nature isn't that you're a vampire, Adrian. Your nature is that you're a protector. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, something like wonder in his expression. How can you see me so clearly when I can barely see myself? Because I love you, Serafina said, the words escaping before she could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian went perfectly still, his red eyes wide with shock. I'm sorry, Serafina said quickly. I know that's not part of our arrangement. I know you didn't ask for... Adrian silenced her with a kiss that was nothing like the brief, cold touch of lips they had shared at their wedding. This kiss was passionate and desperate, full of centuries of loneliness and the sudden, overwhelming need for connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I love you too, Adrian said against her lips. God help me, I love you too. Is that so terrible? Serafina asked. It's terrifying, Adrian admitted. I haven't allowed myself to love anyone in over 2 centuries, the last woman I loved. What happened to her? Adrian's expression grew pained. She was human. She grew old while I remained young. I watched her wither and die while I stayed exactly the same. It nearly destroyed me. So you decided never to love again. It seemed safer, for everyone involved. Serafina cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Adrian, I'm already in love with you. The choice has been made. The only question now is what we do about it. I could turn you, Adrian said quietly. Make you like me. We could have eternity together. Is that what you want? I want you to have a choice, Adrian said. The same choice I gave Mrs. Whitmore. A real choice, made with full knowledge of what it means. And what does it mean? It means giving up your humanity, your mortality, your ability to walk in sunlight. It means feeding on blood to survive, watching everyone you've ever known grow old and die while you remain unchanged. It means an existence that many would consider a curse. And the alternative? The alternative is that I love you for whatever time we have, knowing that eventually I'll lose you to age and death. Serafina considered this. How long do humans usually live in your world? With access to vampire blood for healing, supernatural protection, the best medical care money can buy. Longer than normal, Adrian admitted, perhaps twice the usual lifespan, if they're careful. So we could have 60 or 70 years together, if we're fortunate. That's not nothing, Serafina said. That's a lifetime of love and music and shared experiences. That's more than most people get. But it's not forever. Nothing is forever, Adrian. Even vampires can be killed. Even immortals can choose to end their existence. The only guarantee any of us have is the present moment. Adrian pulled her closer, his arms encircling her waist. When did you become so wise? When I fell in love with a vampire who thinks he's a monster, Serafina replied with a smile. I am a monster, Adrian said, but there was less conviction in his voice than before. You're my monster, Serafina said, rising on her toes to kiss him again. And I'm your human, and somehow that works. This time, When Adrian kissed her back, there was no hesitation, no holding back. It was a kiss full of promise and passion, the beginning of something that transcended their original arrangement. When they finally broke apart, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "Are you certain about this, about us?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Serafina replied. "Then we'll take it one day at a time," Adrian said. "One night at a time, and we'll see what develops." "I'd like that," Serafina said. "But Adrian..." "Yes? I want to help with your work. I want to be part of what you do, not just someone you come home to." Adrian's eyebrows rose. "That could be dangerous. I'm already in danger by association. I might as well be useful." "What makes you think you'd be useful in supernatural law enforcement?" Serafina smiled. "I spent 5 years convincing everyone around me that I was something I wasn't. I'm very good at deception, at reading people, at blending into situations where I don't belong. Those are useful skills for an investigator." "They are indeed," Adrian said thoughtfully. "Very well. But you'll need training in self-defense, in recognizing supernatural threats, in the politics of our world. I'm a fast learner. I'm sure you are. We'll start tomorrow night." As they made their way upstairs together, Serafina felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged, with someone who knew all her secrets and loved her anyway, embarking on a life that would be anything but ordinary. "Adrian," she said as they reached the landing where their rooms diverged. "Yes? Will you sing with me tomorrow? I'd like to hear your voice." Adrian's smile was soft and genuine. "I'd be honored." "Good night, husband. Good night, wife." As Serafina settled into her bed that night, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. A month ago, she had been a desperate young woman pretending to be mute to avoid an unwanted marriage. Now she was the wife of a vampire duke, in love and loved in return, about to embark on a career in supernatural law enforcement. It was, she thought with a smile, quite an adventure. The next evening brought Serafina's first real introduction to Adrian's work. They were in his study, a room she had never seen before, lined with books on supernatural law, maps of the surrounding counties, and files on various cases he had handled over the years. "The attacks I mentioned yesterday have escalated," Adrian said, spreading several documents across his desk. 3 more bodies were found this morning, all drained of blood, all showing signs of vampire feeding. Serafina studied the reports, noting the locations and timing of the attacks. "They're moving in a pattern," she observed. "Each attack is roughly 10 miles from the last, and they're happening every 3 days." "Excellent observation," Adrian said, looking impressed. "What else do you notice?" "The victims are all young women, all traveling alone or in small groups, and they're all from different social classes. A merchant's daughter, a farmer's wife, a lady's maid. Which suggests that the vampire isn't choosing victims based on social status or convenience. He's choosing them for a specific reason." Serafina frowned, studying the pattern more closely. "Adrian, what do all these women have in common besides their age and gender?" Adrian leaned over her shoulder to look at the map, and Serafina caught his scent, sandalwood and winter air, now familiar and comforting. "They're all attractive," he said slowly, "all described as unusually beautiful. And they're all brunettes," Serafina added, noting the physical descriptions in the reports. "With green eyes." Adrian went very still. "Like you." "Like me," Serafina confirmed, feeling ice form in her stomach. "Adrian, I think this vampire is looking for someone specific, someone who looks like me. Which means you could be in danger. Or I could be bait," Serafina said quietly. "Absolutely not." "Think about it logically," Serafina pressed. "If this vampire is looking for someone who looks like me, then I'm the perfect way to draw him out. We could end this before he kills anyone else." "I won't use my wife as bait for a rogue vampire," Adrian said firmly. "You won't be using me. I'll be volunteering." "The answer is no." Serafina stood and moved around the desk to face him directly. "Adrian, I told you I wanted to help with your work. This is how I can help. This is how you can get yourself killed. Not if we're smart about it, not if we plan carefully and take proper precautions." Adrian's red eyes were intense with worry and frustration. Serafina, you don't understand what you're suggesting. Rogue vampires are unpredictable, violent, often completely mad. If something went wrong, then you'd be there to protect me, Serafina said simply. I trust you, Adrian, completely. Your trust might be misplaced. I don't think so. Serafina moved closer, placing her hands on his chest. You've spent centuries protecting innocence. You won't let anything happen to me. I can't guarantee that. I'm not asking for guarantees. I'm asking for the chance to help stop a killer before he murders more innocent women. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, clearly torn between his protective instincts and the logic of her argument. If we do this, he said finally, we do it my way. Complete surveillance, backup plans, multiple escape routes. At the first sign of real danger, you run. Agreed, Serafina said immediately. And you'll need training first. Self-defense, basic combat skills, how to recognize and avoid vampire compulsion. How long will that take? A week minimum, possibly 2. Adrian, he's killing someone every 3 days. How many more women will die while I'm training? Adrian's jaw clenched. I can try to track him down using conventional methods, which haven't worked so far, Serafina pointed out. You said yourself that he's been active for weeks. There has to be another way. There might be, Serafina said thoughtfully. What if we could draw him out without putting me in direct danger? How? My voice, Serafina said, the idea forming as she spoke. You said it yourself, it's distinctive, beautiful. What if we used it as bait instead of my physical presence? Adrian's eyebrows rose. Explain. We know he's targeting women who look like me, but what if he's not just looking for physical resemblance? What if he's looking for someone specific, someone he knew before he was turned? You think he's hunting someone from his human life, Adrian said, understanding dawning in his expression. It would explain the specific physical type, the pattern of attacks. He's not just feeding, he's searching. Serafina moved to the map, tracing the route of attacks with her finger. What if we could lure him with something more distinctive than appearance? Something that would make him think he'd found who he's looking for? Your voice, Adrian said slowly. If he's hunting someone he remembers, a voice would be more memorable than a face seen from a distance. Exactly. We could stage a performance, somewhere public but controlled. I could sing, and if he's drawn to voices that remind him of his target, he'd come to investigate. Adrian was quiet for several minutes, clearly considering the plan from every angle. It's less dangerous than using you as direct bait, he admitted, but still risky, if he realizes it's a trap. Then you'll be ready for him, Serafina said confidently, along with whatever backup you deem necessary. The Autumn Harvest Festival, Adrian said suddenly. It's in 3 days, in the village of Millbrook, right in the center of his hunting pattern. There's always music, dancing, performances by local talent. Perfect. I could perform as part of the entertainment. Natural, innocent, exactly the sort of event that would draw a vampire hunting for someone specific. I don't like it, Adrian said. But his tone suggested he was warming to the idea despite his reservations. You don't have to like it. You just have to trust me. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, his red eyes intense with emotion. I do trust you. It's everyone else I'm worried about. Then we'll be prepared for everyone else. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Adrian arranged for several of his supernatural allies to attend the festival as backup. Vampires who could blend in with the crowd, werewolves whose enhanced senses could detect threats, even a witch who specialized in protective magic. Serafina spent her time preparing her performance and learning basic self-defense techniques. Adrian was a patient but demanding teacher, drilling her on escape routes, defensive maneuvers, and the subtle signs that indicated supernatural compulsion. Remember, he said as they practiced in the castle's courtyard, vampires move faster than humans can track. If you see someone approaching who seems to glide rather than walk, that's your cue to run. And if I can't run, then you scream, loudly. Every supernatural being within a mile will hear you and come running. What about compulsion? How do I resist it? Focus on something that grounds you, a memory, a sensation, a piece of music. Vampire compulsion works by overwhelming the conscious mind, so anything that keeps you anchored to yourself will help. Serafina nodded, filing away every piece of information. She was nervous about the plan, but also excited. For the first time in her life, she was doing something that mattered, something that could save innocent lives. The night before the festival, Adrian found her in the music room, practicing the songs she planned to perform. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling beside her on the piano bench. "Nervous, excited, terrified," Serafina admitted, all at once. "That's normal. Fear keeps you alert, excitement gives you energy, and nerves keep you sharp. What about you? How are you feeling?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Proud of you, worried about you, grateful that you're willing to do this, and deeply in love with a woman who's braver than she has any right to be." Serafina leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Play something for me, something calming." Adrian's fingers found the keys, and soon the room filled with a gentle melody that seemed designed to soothe frayed nerves. Serafina hummed along, their voices blending in perfect harmony. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said when the music faded, "I want you to know that these past few weeks have been the happiest of my life." "Mine as well," Adrian replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "and there will be many more weeks like them. I promise you that. Don't make promises you can't keep. I never do." The Harvest Festival was in full swing when they arrived in Millbrook the next evening. The village square was decorated with autumn leaves and pumpkins, and the air was filled with the scent of roasted chestnuts and mulled wine. Families strolled between booths selling crafts and treats, while musicians played on a small wooden stage erected for the occasion. Serafina wore a simple but elegant blue dress that complemented her eyes and made her auburn hair shine in the torchlight. She looked like any other young woman attending a village festival, which was exactly the impression they wanted to create. "Remember," Adrian said quietly as they approached the stage, "I'll be watching from the crowd. Marcus and Sarah are positioned at the north and south exits. Eleanor has protective wards around the entire square. If anything feels wrong, I'll signal immediately." Serafina finished. "Adrian, I'll be fine. I know you will, but allow me my protective instincts." Serafina smiled and rose on her toes to kiss his cheek. "I love your protective instincts. They're part of why I fell for you." The festival organizer, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Hartwell, welcomed Serafina warmly when she volunteered to perform. "How wonderful. We always appreciate talented visitors. What will you be singing for us, dear?" "A few folk songs," Serafina replied, "traditional melodies that most people will recognize." "Perfect. You'll go on after young Timothy finishes his fiddle piece." As Serafina waited for her turn, she scanned the crowd for any sign of the vampire they were hunting. Adrian had taught her what to look for. Someone who moved too gracefully, whose skin was too pale, who seemed to glide rather than walk. But so far, everyone in the crowd appeared perfectly human. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Hartwell announced, "we have a special treat for you this evening. Lady Serafina has graciously agreed to share her beautiful voice with us." Serafina stepped onto the small stage, her heart racing with nerves and anticipation. The crowd quieted, faces turning toward her with polite interest. She could see Adrian near the back, his red eyes alert and watchful. She began with a simple folk ballad, her voice clear and sweet in the crisp autumn air. The crowd responded warmly, swaying slightly to the familiar melody. Children stopped their games to listen, and even the vendors paused in their work to enjoy the music. For her second song, Serafina chose something more complex, a haunting melody about lost love that showcased the full range of her voice. As the notes soared through the square, she noticed a change in the crowd's attention. People were leaning forward, completely captivated by the music. It was during the third song that she saw him. He stood at the very edge of the square, partially hidden in the shadows between two buildings. Even from a distance, Serafina could tell he wasn't human. His skin was too pale, his movements too still, his attention too focused. He was staring at her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. But she didn't stop singing. Instead, she let her voice grow stronger, more compelling, drawing him closer with the very thing he was hunting for. The vampire began to move through the crowd, and Serafina could see that Adrian had spotted him too. Her husband was slowly working his way around the edge of the square, positioning himself to intercept the threat. As her song reached its climax, the vampire stepped into the torchlight, and Serafina got her first clear look at him. He was young-looking, probably turned in his early 20s, with dark hair and wild eyes that spoke of madness and obsession. His clothes were torn and stained with what looked like blood, but it was the expression on his face that truly frightened her. He was looking at her as if she were a ghost, as if she were someone he had lost and found again. His lips were moving, forming a name she couldn't hear over her own singing. The vampire began pushing through the crowd more aggressively, no longer trying to blend in. People stumbled out of his way, sensing danger, even if they couldn't identify its source. A few children began to cry and their parents pulled them closer. Serafina finished her song and immediately began another, keeping the vampire's attention focused on her while Adrian and his allies moved into position. But something was wrong. The vampire wasn't approaching the stage directly. Instead, he was circling around, trying to get behind her. "Thank you all so much," Serafina said, cutting her performance short. "You've been a wonderful audience." She stepped down from the stage, moving toward the center of the square where Adrian could reach her more easily. But the vampire was faster than she had anticipated. He appeared beside her with inhuman speed, his hand closing around her wrist with bruising force. "Catherine," he whispered, his voice broken and desperate. "Catherine, I've been looking for you everywhere." Up close, Serafina could see that he was completely mad. His eyes were wild with hunger and obsession, and his grip on her wrist was strong enough to break bone. "I'm not Catherine," she said calmly, remembering Adrian's training about staying grounded. "My name is Serafina." "No," the vampire said, shaking his head frantically. "You're Catherine. You have her voice, her face, her eyes. I'd know you anywhere." "Catherine is gone," Serafina said gently, trying to reach whatever humanity might be left in him. "She's been gone for a long time." "She left me," the vampire said, his voice breaking. "She promised to wait for me, but when I came back, she was gone. I've been searching for her ever since." "How long have you been searching?" "Forever. Decades. Since the night I was turned." His grip on her wrist tightened. "But now I've found you. Now we can be together forever." Serafina could see Adrian approaching from behind the vampire, moving with deadly silence. She needed to keep the creature distracted for just a few more seconds. "Tell me about Catherine," she said. "What was she like?" "Beautiful. Perfect. She had the most wonderful voice. She used to sing to me in the evenings, just like you were singing tonight." The vampire's expression grew dreamy, lost in memory. "She promised to marry me when I returned from the war, but when I came back—" "What happened when you came back?" "I was different, changed. The vampire who turned me said I could have eternal life, that Catherine and I could be together forever, but she was afraid of me. She ran away." "And you've been looking for her ever since?" "I found others who looked like her, who sounded like her. But they weren't her. They weren't my Catherine." His eyes focused on Serafina with renewed intensity. "But you are. I know you are." "I'm not—" The vampire's other hand shot out, gripping her throat. "Don't lie to me. I've waited too long, searched too hard. You're coming with me, Catherine. We're going to be together forever, just like we planned." That was when Adrian struck. He moved with inhuman speed, appearing behind the vampire and driving a wooden stake toward his heart. But the rogue vampire's madness made him unpredictable. He spun at the last second, the stake catching him in the shoulder instead of the heart. The vampire shrieked in pain and rage, releasing Serafina and turning to face Adrian with fangs bared. "You can't have her. She's mine." "She's my wife," Adrian said calmly, positioning himself between Serafina and the threat. "And you're going to let her go." "Never!" The vampire lunged at Adrian with desperate fury. What followed was a battle unlike anything Serafina had ever witnessed. The two vampires moved with inhuman speed and strength, their fight taking them across the square in a blur of motion. The festival crowd screamed and scattered, parents grabbing their children and fleeing for safety. Adrian was clearly the superior fighter, older, stronger, more experienced. But the rogue vampire fought with the desperate fury of complete madness, making him dangerous and unpredictable. They crashed through a vendor's booth, sending pumpkins and cornstalks flying. The rogue vampire grabbed a broken piece of wood and swung it at Adrian's head, but Adrian ducked and countered with a blow that sent his opponent flying into the side of a building. "It's over," Adrian said, producing another wooden stake. "Surrender now and I'll make it quick." "Never!" the vampire snarled. "If I can't have Catherine, no one can." He turned toward Serafina with murder in his eyes, but Adrian was faster. The stake found its mark this time, piercing the rogue vampire's heart with deadly accuracy. The vampire's eyes widened in shock, then slowly dimmed as his body crumbled to dust, leaving only his clothes behind. The square fell silent except for the distant sounds of fleeing festival-goers. Adrian stood over the pile of dust that had been their enemy, his chest heaving with unnecessary breath. "Is it over?" Serafina asked, moving to his side. "It's over," Adrian confirmed, pulling her into his arms. "Are you hurt?" "Just bruised," Serafina said, looking at the marks on her wrist where the vampire had grabbed her. "Adrian, he thought I was someone named Catherine, someone he loved before he was turned." "Obsessive love is common among newly turned vampires," Adrian explained, his arms tightening around her. "They fixate on their human lives, unable to accept that those relationships are over." He'd been hunting her for decades, killing women who reminded him of her. "And now he's at peace," Adrian said gently, "as are his victims." Marcus and Sarah appeared from the crowd, both looking relieved that the threat had been neutralized. "Well done," Marcus said, "both of you. That was expertly handled." "The plan worked perfectly," Sarah added. "Your voice drew him out exactly as we hoped." "Is everyone else safe?" Serafina asked. "A few minor injuries from people fleeing in panic, but nothing serious," Marcus reported. "Elena's protective wards kept the real damage contained." As they made their way back to the castle, Serafina reflected on her first real involvement in Adrian's work. It had been terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, and she felt a deep satisfaction in knowing they had stopped a killer before he could claim more victims. "How do you feel?" Adrian asked as their carriage rolled through the night. "Proud, scared, grateful it's over." Serafina leaned against his shoulder. "And ready to do it again when the next case comes along?" "You're certain about that? Tonight could have gone very differently." "But it didn't. We planned carefully, we worked together, and we succeeded." Serafina looked up at him. "I want to be your partner in this, Adrian. Not just your wife, but your true partner." Adrian's smile was soft and proud. "I can't think of anyone I'd rather have by my side. Even though I'm human. Even though I'm vulnerable. Especially because you're human," Adrian said. "You bring something to this work that I could never provide. Compassion, understanding, the ability to connect with victims and witnesses in ways that I cannot. And you bring centuries of experience, supernatural strength, and the most beautiful voice I've ever heard when you sing." "I don't sing," Adrian protested. "You will," Serafina said with a smile. "I'm going to teach you to use your voice the way you've taught me to use mine." Is that a promise or a threat? Both. 6 months later, the music room at Ravencrest Castle had become the heart of their home, the place where Serafina and Adrian spent their evenings making music together. What had begun as Adrian playing while Serafina sang had evolved into something far more complex and beautiful, true duets where their voices blended in perfect harmony. Tonight was special, though. Tonight, they were preparing for their first public performance together. "I still think this is madness," Adrian said, adjusting his formal evening wear in the mirror. "Vampires don't perform in public. It draws too much attention." "Vampires who are trying to hide perform in public all the time," Serafina countered, fastening a sapphire necklace around her throat, a gift from Adrian to celebrate their 6-month anniversary. "They attend parties, they socialize, they participate in society. This is just another form of social participation. This is us standing on a stage in front of 200 people and singing together. That's hardly subtle." "It's a charity benefit for the local orphanage," Serafina said, moving to stand behind him and adjusting his cravat. We're performing as the Duke and Duchess of Ravencrest, supporting a worthy cause. Nothing suspicious about that. Adrian caught her hands in his, bringing them to his lips to press gentle kisses to her knuckles. You're not nervous at all, are you? Terrified, Serafina admitted, but excited. We've been practicing for weeks, and our voices. Adrian, when we sing together, it's magic. Literal magic in some cases, Adrian said with a slight smile. Eleanor mentioned that our harmonies have been affecting the castle's protective wards, making them stronger. See? We're a good team. The best, Adrian agreed, turning in her arms to face her properly. In all things. Their work together had indeed proven successful, beyond either of their expectations. In the 6 months since the Harvest Festival incident, they had solved a dozen cases involving supernatural threats. Serafina's human perspective and natural empathy had proven invaluable in understanding victims and witnesses, while her voice had become a powerful tool for drawing out creatures who were drawn to beauty and music. Adrian, meanwhile, had discovered that having a partner he trusted completely allowed him to take calculated risks he never would have attempted alone. Together, they had stopped a werewolf pack that was terrorizing travelers, exposed a witch who was selling cursed love potions, and tracked down 3 more rogue vampires, but it was their personal relationship that had truly flourished. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had become a love story that surprised them both with its depth and intensity. Are you ready? Adrian asked, offering her his arm. With you? Always. The charity benefit was being held in the ballroom of Ashford Manor, the estate of Lord and Lady Pemberton, who were known throughout the county for their philanthropic efforts. The cream of local society was in attendance, along with several notable figures from London who had travelled specifically for the event. Serafina and Adrian mingled with the other guests during the reception, playing their roles as the mysterious but charming Duke and Duchess of Ravencrest. Adrian's centuries of experience in navigating social situations served them well, while Serafina's natural warmth and intelligence made her an instant favourite among the other ladies. Your Grace, Lady Pemberton said, approaching them with obvious excitement, I cannot tell you how thrilled we are that you've agreed to perform for us tonight. When we heard about your musical talents, we simply had to ask. We're honoured to support such a worthy cause, Serafina replied graciously. The orphanage does vital work in the community. Indeed it does, and I must say the anticipation for your performance is quite high. Word has spread about your beautiful voice, and everyone is eager to hear the Duke sing as well. Adrian inclined his head politely. I hope we won't disappoint. Impossible, Lady Pemberton declared. Now, you'll be performing after dinner just before the dancing begins. Will that suit you? Perfectly, Serafina said. As Lady Pemberton moved away to attend to other guests, Adrian leaned close to Serafina's ear. Last chance to change your mind, he murmured. Not a chance, Serafina replied. Besides, look around, half these people are probably supernatural beings themselves, hiding in plain sight just like we are. Adrian's enhanced senses confirmed her observation. The gentleman by the fireplace is definitely a werewolf, and that woman in the green dress has the aura of a witch. See, we're in good company. Dinner was an elaborate affair, with multiple courses and fine wines that Adrian pretended to drink while Serafina actually enjoyed. The conversation was lively and intelligent, covering everything from politics to literature to the latest scientific discoveries. I understand you're quite the scholar, Your Grace, said Mr. Whitfield, a banker from London who was seated across from Adrian. Lord Pemberton mentioned that you have an extensive library. I've had time to accumulate a few books over the years, Adrian replied diplomatically. Any particular areas of interest? History, primarily. Ancient civilizations, cultural development, the evolution of human society. How fascinating. I don't suppose you have any first-hand accounts of historical events. Primary sources are so valuable for understanding the past. Serafina had to hide a smile. If only Mr. Whitfield knew that he was speaking to someone who had lived through several centuries of the history he found so fascinating. A few, Adrian said carefully. Though one must always be cautious about the reliability of historical accounts, people tend to remember events differently than they actually occurred. Very true. Memory is notoriously unreliable. Indeed it is, Adrian agreed, and Serafina heard the weight of centuries in those simple words. When it came time for their performance, Serafina felt the familiar flutter of nerves in her stomach. But as they took the small stage that had been erected in the ballroom, and she saw Adrian's calm confidence, her anxiety transformed into excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lord Pemberton announced, "it is my great pleasure to present the Duke and Duchess of Ravencrest, who have graciously agreed to perform for us this evening in support of the Ashford Orphanage." Polite applause filled the ballroom as Adrian moved to the piano and Serafina took her position beside it. They had chosen their program carefully. 3 pieces that would showcase both their individual talents and their ability to harmonize together. Adrian's fingers found the keys, and the opening notes of their first piece filled the room. It was a classical art song, complex and beautiful, that required both technical skill and emotional depth. When Serafina began to sing, her voice soared through the ballroom with crystalline clarity. The audience, which had been politely attentive, became completely captivated. Conversations stopped, glasses were set down, and every eye in the room focused on the stage. Adrian joined her for the second verse, his rich baritone blending with her soprano in perfect harmony. The effect was magical, literally, as Serafina could feel the supernatural energy in the room responding to their combined voices. Their second piece was a folk ballad that told the story of 2 lovers separated by war but reunited in death. It was hauntingly beautiful, and Serafina could see tears in the eyes of several audience members as their voices wove together the tale of eternal love. For their final piece, they had chosen something more uplifting, a duet about hope and renewal that left the audience feeling inspired and joyful. When the last note faded, the ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. People were on their feet, calling for an encore, their faces bright with wonder and delight. "Magnificent!" Lord Pemberton exclaimed as he joined them on stage. "Absolutely magnificent. I've never heard anything quite like it." "Thank you," Serafina said, glowing with the satisfaction of a performance well done. "You must perform again," Lady Pemberton insisted, appearing at her husband's side. "Perhaps at our Christmas gala or the spring charity auction." "We would be delighted," Adrian replied, though Serafina could see the slight tension around his eyes that indicated he was already planning how to manage their growing public profile. As they mingled with the guests after their performance, Serafina was struck by how many people approached them with genuine warmth and appreciation. Several mentioned that their music had moved them to tears, while others spoke of feeling uplifted and inspired. "Your voice," said an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as Professor Hartwell, "it's quite remarkable. Have you had formal training?" "Some," Serafina replied modestly, "though I've been fortunate to have an excellent teacher recently." She glanced at Adrian, who smiled at the compliment. "And you, Your Grace?" Professor Hartwell continued, turning to Adrian. "Your technique is flawless. I'd venture to say you've been singing for decades." "Something like that," Adrian agreed. "Well, you're both extraordinarily talented. I do hope you'll consider performing more often. The world needs more beauty in it, especially in these troubled times." As they made their way home in their carriage, Serafina reflected on the evening's success. "That went better than I could have hoped," she said, settling against Adrian's side. "You were magnificent," Adrian said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "though I suspect we may have created a problem for ourselves." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where everyone in the county wants to hear us perform again. Maintaining a low profile may become challenging." "Is that such a bad thing?" Serafina asked. "We could use our performances to support charitable causes, to bring beauty and joy to people's lives. Isn't that a worthy use of our gifts?" "It is," Adrian agreed, "but it also means more public attention, more scrutiny, more opportunities for someone to notice that I don't age or that I'm never seen during daylight hours. Then we'll be careful. We'll perform occasionally, at carefully chosen events, always with plausible explanations for any oddities people might notice." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. We're already living double lives. supernatural investigators by night, respectable nobility by day. Adding occasional musical performers to that list isn't much of a stretch. Adrian was quiet for a moment, considering her words. You're right, of course. And I must admit, I enjoyed performing with you tonight. There's something liberating about sharing our music with others. There is. And did you notice how the supernatural beings in the audience reacted? They could sense the magic in our harmonies. We're not just entertaining people, we're creating something that bridges the gap between the human and supernatural worlds. Another tool in our investigative arsenal, Adrian mused. Music that can calm hostile supernatural beings, voices that can compel truth from reluctant witnesses. Exactly. We're not just husband and wife, or even just partners in supernatural law enforcement. We're something new, a team that combines human empathy with vampire strength, mortal creativity with immortal experience. And music, Adrian added. Always music. Always, Serafina agreed. As their carriage rolled through the night toward Ravencrest Castle, Serafina thought about how much her life had changed since that desperate night when she had agreed to marry a vampire to escape her father's debts. She had expected nothing more than financial security and protection from unwanted suitors. Instead, she had found love, purpose, and a partnership that challenged and fulfilled her in ways she had never imagined possible. Adrian? She said softly. Yes? Do you ever regret it? Marrying me, I mean. Taking on a human wife with all the complications that entails? Adrian's arms tightened around her. Never. Not for a single moment. You've brought light into my existence in ways I didn't know were possible. Even though I'm mortal? Even though you'll eventually lose me? Especially because you're mortal, Adrian said firmly. Your humanity is what makes you so precious, Serafina. Your compassion, your courage, your ability to find joy in simple things, those are gifts that immortality often destroys. And when I grow old, when I'm no longer young and beautiful, then I'll love you for your wisdom, your experience, your lifetime of shared memories. Beauty fades, but love, true love, only grows stronger with time. Serafina felt tears prick her eyes. I love you so much it sometimes frightens me. I know the feeling, Adrian said softly, but fear is just love with nowhere to go. And our love has everywhere to go. They spent the rest of the journey in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the future they were building together. When they reached the castle, Adrian helped her down from the carriage with the same courtly grace he had shown on their wedding night. Shall we retire to the music room? He asked. I find myself wanting to hear your voice again, just for us this time. I'd like that, Serafina said. But Adrian? Yes. Tonight I want to hear you sing alone, just your voice, without accompaniment. Adrian looked surprised. Why? Because your voice is beautiful, and I want to hear it the way you hear mine. Pure and unadorned and perfect. In the music room, Adrian stood by the window that looked out over the castle grounds, moonlight silvering his dark hair. When he began to sing, a simple melody about eternal love, Serafina felt her heart swell with emotion. His voice was rich and deep, carrying the weight of centuries, but also the hope of their shared future. It was the voice of someone who had known great loss, but had found love again, someone who had lived in darkness, but had discovered light. When the song ended, Serafina moved to stand beside him at the window. Beautiful, she whispered. Not as beautiful as you, Adrian replied, turning to take her in his arms. I meant your voice. I meant your everything. They kissed then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Outside, the moon shone down on Ravencrest Castle, illuminating the gardens where they had first begun to fall in love, the courtyard where they had trained together, the grounds where they had built a life that was both ordinary and extraordinary. What are you thinking about? Adrian asked against her lips. The future, Serafina said. All the music we'll make together, all the cases we'll solve, all the years we'll have. However many years that may be. However many, Serafina agreed. But Adrian, yes, I want you to know that even if we only had tonight, it would be enough. This love, this partnership, This life we've built, it's more than I ever dreamed possible. It's more than I thought I deserved, Adrian said softly. You deserve everything, Serafina said firmly. Love, happiness, music, purpose, all of it. And I'm going to spend however many years we have making sure you never forget that. And I'm going to spend those same years making sure you never regret choosing a monster for a husband. You're not a monster, Serafina said, cupping his face in her hands. You're my husband, my partner, my love. You're the man who heard me sing and fell in love with my voice before you ever saw my face. You're the vampire who chose to protect rather than prey, to build rather than destroy. I'm the creature who found salvation in the song of a woman who pretended to be mute. And I'm the woman who found her voice in the love of a vampire who thought he was beyond redemption. They held each other in the moonlit music room, surrounded by the instruments that had brought them together and the memories of all the music they had made. Tomorrow would bring new cases to solve, new challenges to face, new opportunities to use their combined gifts in service of others. But tonight was theirs, a vampire and his human wife, making music together in a castle where love had conquered fear, where hope had triumphed over despair, where two souls had found perfect harmony against all odds. And in the distance, carried on the night wind, the faint sound of singing could be heard, not from the castle but from the village below, where people were still humming the melodies they had heard that evening, their hearts lifted by the magic of voices joined in perfect love. What an absolutely magical journey we just experienced. From Serafina's desperate deception to hide from unwanted marriages, to that breathtaking moment when Adrian first heard her sing and fell completely under her spell. The way their love story unfolded through music, with every duet bringing them closer together, just completely melted my heart. I'm still getting chills thinking about how Serafina used her voice as bait to catch that obsessed vampire, and how their musical partnership became so much more than either of them ever expected. The way Adrian saw through her facade of muteness, but chose to wait patiently for her to trust him enough to speak. Pure romantic perfection. Which moment hit you hardest? Was it when Serafina first sang for Adrian and he realized what a treasure he'd found? The dangerous festival performance that brought them together as true partners? Or that final scene where they performed publicly and created literal magic with their combined voices? If this story of hidden voices, vampire nobility, and love that transcends the supernatural moved your soul, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Your support helps me bring you more enchanting tales where love conquers all, even the impossible. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you think you could have kept up Serafina's act of being mute for 5 whole years? And what did you think of Adrian's patience in waiting for her to reveal her true self? Plus, I'm dying to know which of their musical moments gave you the most goosebumps. Next week, I'm bringing you another spellbinding supernatural romance. The witch's curse backfired. Now she's bound to serve the demon she tried to banish. Get ready for enemies to lovers magic, forbidden attraction, and a heroine who discovers that sometimes the best way to defeat your enemy is to fall in love with them. Until then, remember that sometimes the most beautiful voices are the ones that have been silenced by fear, waiting for the right person to help them sing again.